it's been 40 years since the Orphan Drug Act was passed. I was a mere baby at the time. If you believe me, we'll have a conversation later. And it's really amazing how both the development of rare disease as well as identifying patients with rare disease have advanced over the last 40 years. And, you know, an important component of federal policy is looking at how we can protect the advancements using the Orphan Drug Act into the future and what that looks like going forward for patients, as well as companies seeking to develop therapeutics that treat rare disease. I am pleased to welcome Amanda Malakoff, the Executive Director of the Rare Disease Company Coalition, to moderate this panel of experts. As soon as we get everyone mic'd up for their newscast performance. So let's welcome the panel.
Thank you. I feel actually a little bit more like a pop star than a newscaster. So thanks for letting me live my dream here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. So we're here to talk about rare disease, as Jennifer teed up. There's actually been decent amount of dialogue about rare disease during the session today, but I promised I would start with just a few kind of baseline statistics about rare disease and why it matters. So a rare disease in the U.S. is defined as one that impacts under 200,000 people. So Luke actually mentioned this earlier. A rare disease is not actually that rare. 1 in 10 people in the U.S. have a rare disease. That amounts to 30 million people that live with a rare disease. So it represents a huge unmet need in the country. Today, 95% of people with 95% of rare diseases don't have a treatment approved by the FDA. So there's a lot of urgency to change that number. The Rare Disease Company Coalition, which I represent, we have 21 rare disease biotech companies in the coalition, and collectively they're working on over 200 treatments for rare diseases. So a lot of progress is underway, but still a lot of challenges, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So another statistic we really can't avoid as we talk about rare disease is the diagnostic odyssey. On average, it takes a patient about 7 years to receive a rare disease diagnosis. And so what I'm hoping we can do to start out is both Heather and Amber have you talk a little bit about the diagnostic odyssey that your family has gone through, and just what does life with a rare disease look like for you?
She did all the things baby girls are supposed to do, cuddle, and at about 9. A little bit more. Like that. So 9 months, I had read the baby book. I knew she was supposed to be bearing weight on her legs. Probably a shut mom up referral, but I took it nonetheless. We then started to see a bunch of different providers. For us, my husband had a background in genetics, and he pushed us to see a geneticist fairly early in the process. This was some time ago. The geneticist was actually able to 20 conditions at once using what was then a novel technology called gene chip. We can do far better than that today, but none of those 20 conditions came out. Maisie was continuing to make progress, but she still wasn't going to apply. She still wasn't doing a child her age needed to be doing. The geneticist didn't rush us off. 3 more ideas. The condition she has Rett syndrome. 2 big giveaways. One is seizures and one is a hand pattern. She didn't have either of those, so he wasn't clueless. He was just guessing. When the test for Rett syndrome came back, it was probably about a year started our first pediatrician medical concern. But still really quick, essentially looking at hallmark symptoms. It was the proverbial two-edged sword. Right? So the answer, wasn't bad parenting, diet program. It was a random genetic mutation. Was the treatment for, but that didn't mean that the knowledge was not valuable. Testing and other things, it was still extremely. It opened up to get therapies. Rett syndrome has a very steep decline typically, so girls develop typically to two off the cliff. She still felt she still lost all the skills from learning with the saver. She kind of got to roll. We were there, had the therapies that she needed in place. They were a little bit extra time with those skills for when you have a child with a rare disease. It's wonderful. And so it's for us having access to geneticists, getting that information for the physician to follow us was truly.
Thank you. And I can share a little bit about the diagnostic odds that you've been on and what life looks like for your family.
Sure. So prior to having twins, I was an equity analyst for Janus Henderson Investors. I loved my job. It was all consumer. And in 2017, I had the most adorable boy-girl twins, Maxwell and Riley. And I like to say if they had been on the cover of People magazine, they would have sold way more covers than the Branchwing twins. They were just adorable, and holding them, I didn't know love like that existed on Earth. It was shortly after birth that I noticed Maxwell wasn't advancing like his natural benchmark of a sister, Riley. He wasn't meeting milestones, he had strange stereotypies, he was constantly staring at his finger. And I go to the pediatrician, and my pediatrician would tell me, Amber, you're Noura's new mother, and you're also very warm. And that's true. And I'd say, I know, but mother's intuition rings louder than a freight train, and something is not right. So I went around him and pulled every personal string at Children's Hospital to see the right doctors. Went through a lot of invasive testing that was totally unfair to this perfect, beautiful little child. And finally, we were offered genetic testing. After what felt like an eternity, doctors called us in. Maxwell was 2 years old by this point, and I was told Maxwell has SLC 6A1. And I was super prepared for bad news, just based off of the tone of the call and the doctor's faces in the room and that terrible, sterile room with so many people staring at me. I was really confused as to why my son was diagnosed with a flight number. And I said, okay, so what's the name of the disease? Like, who discovered it? And the doctor said, oh, someone discovered it, but this is an orphan disease. It's too rare for anyone to care. So it's a rare neurological disease. And I said, well, how long is he going to live? And they said, oh, we don't know. We found this paper, and there's 30 other patients with this in the world. And so you'll have to conduct a natural history study in order for us to know. And I was just like, oh my God. They still said that bad dreams, that's getting worse. And so I took out my phone and I Googled, and I typed in SLC 6A1. And we've all mistyped something into Google and had to call HR and apologize for what came up. And this was the only instance in my life where it said no search results found. It's terrible. So the questions started like, who am I seeing by neurology, genetics? I'm like, we're not sure. We should talk internally about it. And it was at that moment where I realized I'm totally on an island here. There is nothing, there's nobody here to help me. This is it. And there was nothing I wanted more than to crawl under a rock and die and freak out and cry for years. But this moment wasn't about me. It was about my son Maxwell. And I had the rest of my life to grieve. And Maxwell hadn't started his. So I made the decision at that moment to fight like a mother for Maxwell. I was going to fight like the third monkey on the loading deck to Noah's Ark, and it just started to rain. And I have been doing that ever since. I went back to work, quit my job, and I have devoted every waking moment to helping Maxwell and children like him ever since.
Sharing a little bit of your story. You're both very strong. I know we're all really impressed by both of you. So you had mentioned Amber and Orphan Drug. So what is that? Drug Act. So just to switch gears a little bit, is talking about the drug development process. 2023 marks the 40-year anniversary of the Orphan Drug Act. Prior to the Orphan Drug Act, only 40 treatments have been approved for rare diseases. Now there are over 600 treatments that have been approved for rare diseases thanks to the incentives that the Orphan Drug Act has established, things like tax credits, exclusivity for rare disease drugs, and also funding for rare disease research. So progress is being made, albeit slowly. We still have a lot more work to do. So Christina, I'd like to turn to you. What is different about the orphan drug development process? What is it, and why are these incentives needed?
Yes, so I'm Christina Hochul, and I head up our strategic alliance development function at Alexion, which is National Center for Rare Disease. So really happy to be here. I actually was affected by a rare disease as a child. I was fortunate to have access to a therapy. My father is a physician, and he and my mother fought tirelessly to get me access to therapy and get all the diagnostic testing. But it took many years. And here I am today, and my condition, my husband is like, I had growth hormone deficiency. So I love that my current role, I'm able to work with patient advocacy organizations, trade associations, physicians to kind of amplify their voices in front of policymakers on Capitol Hill and at the state level. So the drug development process is, a little bit different on the rare disease space. Alexion has been in this space for over 30 years. But, developing a drug for rare disease. So first, the economics are very different. The research part of it, we have small trial sizes, we've got panelists and others about just, finding different patients with this type of rare disease. We also know that we've heard a lot about the diagnostic journey. So with the rare disease space, we know it can take almost 5 years, and a patient may see almost 7 specialists with diagnosed. So we're in the healthcare system for a very long time. There's not a lot of knowledge of rare diseases by physicians. So you're going around and waiting, to get the diagnosis. And then finally the treatment side of it. Amanda talked about before the Orphan Drug Act, less than 40 therapies for diseases, and now we're at more than 600. So that is quite the advancement. However, more than 90% of rare diseases still don't have therapy. So we have a long way to go, and we really need these incentives in place to keep the research and development in check. So Alexion is very committed to kind of addressing these challenges, as other rare disease companies are in this room too.
And from your perspective, do you think that policy is supportive of that today?
I think we've seen some policies kind of try to chip away at some of the Orphan Drug Act incentives. So with the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, there was a lot of positive policies in place for patients, but there has been, that there's some unique challenges with development, and some of those policies may hamper the space. So you've seen some companies make some announcements and making decisions in their pipeline because of this new law. And I do think that in rare disease drug development, when you have a rare disease therapy and it's safe and effective, one disease state, a lot of time to build on that or study it at the patient populations to develop a lot of information about the disease state, and some of the provisions in the law can really harbor that type of approach that manufacturers may take.
So as we think about maybe some of those threats or incentives going away to this, either Evan or Amber, from your perspective, what does that mean to your community?
Sure. So when my daughter was newly diagnosed, so 2007, Rett was shown to be reversible in a mouse model. It is the type of study that if it had been for a common condition, it had not used every which way. But because it was a rare disease, you can spend very good nature to the patient population. She died waiting for that kind of transformative research to get into medicine. So these incentives, they're not giveaways, right? They matter to real patients. And as you said, it's like so much in Washington, the Orphan Drug Act, it's worked. We tried many things in Washington, we tried many policies that fail, that don't do what we want, that have unintended consequences. This is a statute that has built a pipeline, that has brought hope, and has given meaning to so many patients that human beings, something to come. Now that we've made this huge investment, kind of disincentive have the threat of walking away from this very successful program is obviously personally devastating, but also I think just misguided.
Sure. I think one important statistic to mention is that 50% of all rare disease impact children, and only 30% of those children will live to see their 5th birthday. That's the reality of rare disease, and I think the speaker on Medicare and Medicaid did a great job of talking about some of the programs available to the older population and meeting those needs, but none of the children's needs are being met. We can't even get an ICD-10 code so that children have a real diagnosis. Every single hurdle is hand-to-hand combat for us, and so I advocate for much less bureaucracy in the orphan disease drug state, because our patients have no other choice. We're never going to be able to hold a trial with 20,000 patients because there aren't 20,000 patients. We're really lucky if we can recruit 10, and they're going to die anyway. They're going to die, their patients are going to have no quality of life. It's going to be a tragedy. So we let these families have hope.
Thank you. So on that note, as we think about hope, we've all acknowledged the Orphan Drug Act has made some progress, but as we look to the next 40 years, what do you all want to see? What ways can we make it better or keep building on it? Christina, we can just share that.
Yeah, I think that just policymakers should listen to everyone in this room. We've heard a lot of great presentations and a lot of key challenges have been brought up. And again, I would just love to say just around the Inflation Reduction Act to just, ensure that unique challenges of rare diseases are also considered when we say these policies. They do have effects on real people and real patients here.
Yeah, I just would like to say there's also a role for state and local governments. Obviously, the federal government is the 800-pound gorilla, but investing in biotech, investing in care, and and things that are doing physicians.
And pharma are more aligned than ever before right now because we're working together to form clinical endpoints based on biomarkers and really understand what matters to patients because that's what makes trials successful. And if we're able to break through some bureaucracy and bring treatments to patients earlier, it's really a win-win for everyone involved. One way that I would improve the system right now is there are a lot of incentives around bringing new orphan drugs to trial. But one thing we haven't given a lot of thought to is repurposing drugs. There are thousands of known FDA drugs, and we would not have drugs like Latisse or Viagra if they weren't repurposed for what was a different indication at some point. And so why not add some of the incentives we have existing for new drugs, for repurposed drugs that are there with a known safety profile, may make a big difference in some of these orphan conditions.
Thank you. Good points all around from each of you. Last question of the day, and then we have time for some Q&A from the audience. But on closing, what would each of your calls to action be, both for policymakers and for people in the room that might want to help or lend their voice to the goals we're talking about today?
Well, thank you. So I think just doing everything we can, like hearing all the different perspectives between, manufacturers, patients, providers, physicians, to really close the gap on rare disease therapies. So we still have a lot of work to do. We still need a lot of FDA therapies to help all these patients out there. So we need to continue with the incentives, and we need to work cross-functionally all together and be our own state.
I just would say sort of two things about it. One thing we talk about rare, it's a good thing, right? It's rare wine, rare arts. We get to rare disease. But I do want to say there's two great things about rare. First, if you have a rare disease, your child has a rare disease, we're not alone. We've heard 10%, millions of people are with you, millions of people can relate. Policymakers need to be concerned that it's more common to have a rare disease than and the second thing is conditions with single genetic mutation like Rett syndrome, like Roots water, are actually really well defined. In my daughter's case, it's MECP2 gene, it's position R255. There's a stop time where it doesn't need to be. We know from the restore functions of that gene, that outcome is really impressive. Compare that to something like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, where we spend millions of dollars. We're not really sure what's going on. It's in these small, well-defined conditions that we can really move into the next generation of curative medicine rather than all of the symptom chasers. So I think that rare diseases, you can't look at, it's only going to affect, that's concentrated one in 10,000. It's not that it's just going to affect those patients. Studies and research in these well-defined conditions is going to drive innovation.
I think it takes a whole lot of people to create change. And just like AIDS was in the 80s, just like cancer has been, those movements have become large enough. The mind has become loud enough to not ignore. And rare disease is the next movement. Everybody in this room is going to be the face of rare. If it's not yourself, it's going to be a loved one at some point. And there's so much room to be made in rare conditions. In monogenic haploinsufficient diseases, we know how to replace these genes, and I truly believe that someday these more simplistic diseases will unlock industries to much more complex diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, certain kinds of cancer. So it's best for rare disease, it's really best for medicine.
Thank you. Really appreciate each of you sharing. I know the audience has some questions. Yeah.
Hey, you guys are just some of my favorite people, so thank you. My question is, and I would defer to the policy, getting those folks in the room. I could be wrong on the numbers, but if the orphan tax credit being so critical and also so fragile, I think was it 25% of potential R&D research would be covered by that.
So it was 50% when the ODA or the Orphan Drug Act was created, but it's since been reduced to 25%.
So organizations like Rex Hoover Foundation, like Amber's organization and our organization that have worked in just a few years to raise exponentially more than 25% of the R&D. So we've teamed up for the D part, right? And so what I imagine is if everybody can advocate for that tax credit to increase, then it'll take the burden of costs away from the families. And that's a huge, huge thing. I mean, Amber and I and Heather, we spend time away from our dying children to go out and raise money, right? And if that orphan drug tax credit is there for the research that we have, paid for, right? Then, those therapeutics are going to come faster. So I would just ask everybody in here to really, really, really push for that tax credit to just, let us spend more time with our families.
Well, thanks. And I'll just say, I know a lot of people are looking for a concrete, what's an action they can take. During Rare Disease Week, Congressmen Gottheimer and Bacon introduced a bill called Cameron's Law that would reinstate the tax credit back to 50%. So if you're looking for something easy to do, supporting or calling your member of Congress and asking them to support that bill can help with that.
What is the compassion space for the rare disease? Say, a lot of technology company, they have some effective food control, maybe or don't find approval, whether there's a very efficacious data laid out as well as safety data. So what is the likelihood that you can get to treat young kids before it gets there? So maybe you have this cases maybe it could she can see some treatment if you can find one.
So there wasn't any action use in that did do. We also generally, my daughter's medication regime was started at 6 a.m. and went to midnight after this line, assuming she was out. All of those drugs were right? It's educated guesses, medicine, cobble together approach that certainly deals with less care, and one of them will really develop for her condition. Compassion use in a different context that may from her, but I think it also influences one of the moments. I just forget about kind of what the humans. I look at all those drugs and spend all that money on therapies, and the rare changes time away. It is an enormous amount of money, right? I went from I pay Wall Street job where I was definitely a tax contributor to my employee to provide my daughter with care. So it's not that these incentives don't sort of net out to the treasury in a payment. But with issues, something that research is done.
And what we've had about compassionate use, you may be granted the right, the access to use the drug, but not necessarily payment of the drug. So for my patient population, there is a drug, and it works really, really well. It is $900,000 a year. So if you're granting compassionate access, great. a specialty pharmacy will fill it, but you just need, $3,000 a day.
At the end of the day, it's up to the company, no regulator, and a lot of things. So.
It's up to the company, and some are easier to work with than others, or some are more closely scrutinized, but you do have to be prepared to pay for it out of pocket. And same position, I went from a high-paying job to being a full-time caretaker to being a single mom. And this is a trajectory of a lot of rare families.
Hi, Amber. You mentioned the inability to run trials in large populations because obviously these are small patient populations. Can you talk a little bit more about what regulatory flexibility might look like that is realistic, that can move these trials forward in a quicker manner? And then also kind of touch on patient-focused drug development. And you've been involved in some of those efforts, and I'd love to hear from you as well, Heather, and what that looks like and what that burden is on education.
Sure. So Maxwell is turning 6 next week. But since his diagnosis, I've raised about $5 million. We're working on a couple of AAV9 gene replacement therapies, some antisense oligonucleotides, and of course we repurposed a drug. And it's been really, really difficult for us because one, we're funding it. We have no skin in the game. We're using academics that are going as fast as they can, but they are academics. And we're held under the same type of scrutiny as like a biotech, except that when you call me, you're getting a hold of the CEO, the AP clerk, the janitor, and they call me. So it's difficult to be held to the same standards and that same economic burden. Like we can't afford the same tox studies. We can't do as long of a trial for rat in mice to check for this gene therapy, which is in clinic now. But it could have been in clinic so much faster. And so understanding those bureaucratic hurdles and all of the economics that comes along with it, we really need a streamlined process when we're bringing a therapy to clinic that's going to affect less than 100 people. I just feel like there needs to be a separate group of just realistic investigators at the FDA that take practicality into account and sit and just meet with these families in a room to understand the best way to treat these patients as quickly as possible. And I'm very, very thankful for all of the lobbyists for helping us get that message out there, because one advantage that, and it sounds really weird to say, but it will make sense once I say it. It was much easier for people with HIV and AIDS and cancer to get out and march and talk to their politicians. Like most rare disease families, we're pushing wheelchairs, checking O2 levels, probably a feeding tube. We forgot to shower. We look like vagrants off the street asking for help, and it's just not so easy for us. So we really rely on the community as a whole to get those voices out for us, because we're prisoners of our house.
I guess, of course, I agree, and I think it is extremely hard. I think this is, again, an area where we can benefit. I appreciate the collaboration, between the patient organization for pharma. We are as parents, some of us, as we're bus drivers, we have a science background, but when we can partner with a small act, they can say, hey, this is the piece of information, this is the idea. These mills invest in, but it is hard. It's trying to get through that, and to replace that further burden, very sick. So I do think we FDA to focus on the condition far more common than lots of diseases that they have.
Yeah, and I think that if I could add to that, it's, we saw a lot of success with when announced the Center of Excellence for Oncology. That meant a lot more in the space. And so I know that's something that some of the companies and regions support of the Center of Excellence diseases with the FDA is really truly the FDA specialists that are going to be looking at the diseases. Just as the panelists mentioned, we really need them to look at real world registries and other mechanisms because it's difficult for us to do these trials and some of these time behind in the disease space. And so I think that encouraging the FDA to document registers on study, more patient drug development, we've seen that more also for disease space. I think would really go access to therapies.
Okay, thanks. We'll time for one more question. Thank you.
My question is other folks in the industry is, do you think so about exponential growth from the patient population? So if it takes from bench to, I don't know, phase 2, 5 or 6 years, are companies thinking forward about, and we hate that word, but why companies thinking by the time we have preclinical proof of concepts to getting to the clinic, there's going to be exponential growth in the patient population that we're discovering more. I'm wondering if it's something the industry is looking forward to what rare diseases.
Yeah, so I think that, Alexia and John the science. And, as a few of the panelists even mentioned on the ICD-10 issue, sometimes it's even difficult to identify the patients. Like, we don't even have a estimated amount of patient population when we're preparing for a launch or preparing for a product in a disease state. But we definitely look at those considerations and think through how we even diagnose our patients. So a lot of our diseases that Alexion, the people in the system for a very long time misdiagnosed, and then no conditions officer ever worsening they finally get access to a therapy. So any ways we can kind of develop and grow out our diagnostics today, tools, and get them properly reimbursed and covered, that's just going to make the patient's journey a lot smoother.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing today. Definitely takes a village, and we're trying to work together to continue to drive urgency here. So thank you all again.